The letter that saved Helena Foster's life arrived on the same day she lost everything. It promised a new beginning in a place called Promise Creek, Wyoming. A new husband, a cattle rancher named Samuel Vaughn, a new future, far from the cold destitution of Philadelphia in 1876. But what Helena didn't know, as she sold the last of her belongings for a train ticket west, was that the letter was a lie. And the man waiting for her wasn't looking for a wife. He was looking for a pawn in a war he was about to lose. 2 weeks later, the train hissed to a stop in Cheyenne. The air tasted of dust and distance. Helena stepped onto the platform, clutching the single bag that held her entire world. She scanned the crowd for the man from the letters. Tall, dark hair, a scar above his left eye. But no one came. The platform emptied, leaving her alone with the setting sun and a rising tide of panic. Had he changed his mind? Was this whole journey a fool's errand? Miss Foster. The voice belonged to a boy, no older than 19, thin as a rail with a gap-toothed grin. I'm Tommy Wilson. Mr. Vaughn sent me. Relief washed over her, so sharp it almost brought her to her knees. He's not here. The boy's grin vanished. Trouble, ma'am. Rustlers. Mr. Vaughn couldn't get away. Rustlers. Cattle thieves. The word sounded foreign, dangerous. They've been hitting ranches all over, Tommy explained, his voice low. Mr. Vaughn's lost 20 head this month alone. He led her to a battered wagon hitched to 2 tired horses. The 60-mile journey to Promise Creek was a brutal introduction to the West. The trail was a scar on the land, the sun was a hammer, and every jolt of the wooden seat felt like a punishment. Tommy chattered on, painting a picture of Samuel Vaughn. A good man, tough but fair. Built one of the biggest ranches in the territory from nothing. He ain't much for words, Tommy admitted when Helena asked about his temperament. Keeps to himself, but he's solid. It wasn't the romantic ideal she'd imagined, but it was better than the alternative. Solid was enough. Honorable was enough. As twilight bled across the sky, a valley opened before them. In the distance, a collection of buildings huddled against a line of cottonwood trees. The Vaughn Ranch. It was larger than she'd expected. A proper 2-story house, a massive barn, a bunkhouse. This was no struggling homestead. This was an empire. As Tommy pulled the wagon into the yard, a tall figure emerged from the barn. He moved with a predator's grace, over 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, dark hair, and as he got closer, she saw it. A thin white scar that cut through his left eyebrow. Samuel Vaughn. He took off his hat, his eyes a startling, piercing blue. They weren't welcoming. They were assessing, measuring. He looked at her not like a prospective bride, but like a complication he hadn't accounted for. Miss Foster, he said. His voice was deep, like stones grinding together. Welcome. He took her offered hand, his grip brief and hard. His palm was rough as bark. You must be tired. Mrs. Hollins has a room for you. Supper is at 7. And with that, he turned and walked back to the barn. He didn't offer to take her bag. He didn't ask about her journey. He dismissed her as if she were a piece of freight. A plump, gray-haired woman appeared at the door. You must be Miss Foster. I'm Edith Hollins, the housekeeper. Come in, child. You look rode hard and put away wet. The house was surprisingly fine. Polished floors, sturdy furniture, even curtains on the windows. But as Mrs. Hollins led her upstairs, a cold dread began to seep into Helena's bones. The room she was shown was small, barely bigger than a closet. A narrow bed, a washstand, a single hook on the wall. It wasn't a guest room. It felt like a servant's quarters. This will be yours for now, Mrs. Hollins said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. After the wedding, you'll move into the master bedroom, of course. The wedding. In just a few days, she would marry that cold, dismissive stranger. After the housekeeper left, Helena sank onto the bed. The mattress was thin, lumpy. She had traveled 2,000 miles for this, for a man who wouldn't look at her, and a room that felt like a prison cell. She stared at the small chest of drawers in the corner. One of the drawers was slightly ajar. She pulled it open. It was empty, save for a small leather-bound book tucked into the back. It was a diary. Her fingers trembled as she opened it to the last entry, the handwriting a frantic scrawl. He knows. He knows I saw him. He said I would be a bride, but this place is not a home, it is a cage. If I am not gone by morning, know that Samuel Vaughn is not the man he pretends to be. He is a monster. The diary was dated 6 months ago. The name on the inside cover was not Helena's. It was Sarah. Who was Sarah? And what had Samuel Vaughn done to her? Helena's blood ran cold. The man she was supposed to marry wasn't just a quiet rancher. He was a monster. And she was trapped in his house, miles from civilization, with a wedding just days away. She had to get out. But how? The ranch was an island in a sea of empty prairie. She had no horse, no money for another ticket. She hid the diary back in the drawer and forced herself to go downstairs. To pretend everything was normal. Her life might depend on it. The kitchen was filled with the smell of roasting beef. Mrs. Hollins was humming, a picture of domestic peace that now seemed sinister. "Can I help?" Helena asked, her voice tight. The housekeeper smiled. "You can set the table, dear. The men will be in soon. They have appetites like wolves." As Helena laid out the plates, she saw the men filing in from outside. They were rough, weathered men. They looked at her with open curiosity, but one of them, a grizzled old cowboy named Hank, gave her a look that was different. It was pity. Samuel was the last to enter. He took his place at the head of the table, his presence silencing the room. His cold blue eyes swept over the men, then landed on Helena. "Men," he announced, his voice booming in the sudden quiet. "This is Miss Helena Foster. She has agreed to become my wife. You will show her respect." It wasn't an introduction. It was a declaration of ownership, a warning. Supper was a tense affair. The men talked quietly amongst themselves. Samuel ate in silence, a thundercloud of a man radiating cold fury. Helena could feel his eyes on her, watching her every move. Did he know she'd found the diary? Did he see the fear in her eyes? After the meal, as Mrs. Hollins cleared the dishes, Samuel stood. "Miss Foster, a word." He led her outside onto the porch. The night air was cool, but Helena was shivering for a different reason. He walked them to a small rise overlooking the ranch. The valley spread below them like a dark blanket. "I want to be clear about this arrangement," he said, his back to her. "I require a wife. This ranch needs a mistress. Your duties will be to manage the household and to present a respectable front in town. Nothing more." It was colder, more transactional than she could have imagined. "And in return," she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "in return you will have a home. You will be provided for. You will be safe." Safe. The word was a mockery. Safe from what? From the world outside? Or from him? He finally turned to face her, his face a mask of stone in the moonlight. The scar above his eye was a livid white slash. "There's a man named Victor Blackwood," he said. "He wants this land. He's been pressuring ranchers, stealing cattle. His men are dangerous. You are not to leave the ranch without my permission. You are not to speak to strangers. Do you understand?" It was a cage. He was locking her in a cage, just like the diary said. She nodded, unable to speak. Fear was a physical thing, a cold hand squeezing her heart. "Good," he said. "The Reverend will be here tomorrow to discuss the wedding." He walked back to the house, leaving her alone on the hill. She looked out at the vast, empty darkness. She had run from one kind of prison only to find herself in another, far more terrifying one. And the warden was the man she was supposed to marry. She had to find a way out. Before the wedding, before she suffered the same fate as the woman named Sarah. The next morning, Helena woke with a plan. A desperate, foolish plan, but the only one she had. She would feign illness. She would delay the wedding, buy herself time. Time to find help. She stayed in her room, pleading a headache from the journey. Mrs. Hollins brought her a tray with tea and toast, her face a mask of sympathy that Helena no longer trusted. "You just rest, dear," the housekeeper cooed. "Mr. Vaughn understands." But when Samuel appeared in her doorway that afternoon, his face was like granite. "The Reverend is here," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Get dressed. We will settle the wedding arrangements now." There was no escape. She was herded downstairs to the parlor, where a thin, kind-eyed man, Reverend Parker, waited. He spoke of community and partnership, his words a jarring contrast to the cold reality of her situation. Samuel sat beside her, a silent, menacing presence. Helena could feel his anger, a palpable heat coming off him in waves. The wedding was set for Sunday, just 3 days away. As the Reverend left, Samuel turned to her. "Tomorrow we ride to town for supplies," he said. "Be ready at dawn." It wasn't a request, it was an order, but it was also an opportunity. Town. There would be people there, the sheriff, someone who could help her. The journey to Promise Creek was made in suffocating silence. Samuel handled the horses with an easy skill, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Was he watching for Blackwood's men, or was he making sure she couldn't run? The town was a single dusty street, lined with wooden storefronts. It felt like a different world. People nodded at Samuel, their expressions a mixture of respect and fear. He was clearly a powerful man here. "I have business with the sheriff," he told her, pulling up in front of the general store. "You will buy what you need for the house and for yourself. Mrs. Marshall, the owner, will assist you. Do not wander. I will be back in 1 hour." He left her on the sidewalk, and for the first time since arriving, she was out of his immediate presence. She hurried into the mercantile, her heart pounding. The store was a treasure trove of goods, from bolts of fabric to sacks of flour. A plump, friendly woman, Abigail Marshall, greeted her. "You must be Miss Foster, Samuel's bride. We've all been so curious to meet you." Her warmth was disarming. But Helena remembered Samuel's warning. Trust no one. As Mrs. Marshall helped her select dresses and boots suitable for ranch life, the bell over the door jingled. A woman entered, a beautiful blonde with ice-chip eyes, dressed in fine silk. "Caroline," Mrs. Marshall said. "Come meet Samuel's intended." The woman, Caroline Richards, looked Helena up and down, a sneer playing on her lips. "So, you're the mail-order bride. I must say, Samuel has interesting taste." The insult was clear. But as Caroline leaned closer, pretending to inspect the fabric of Helena's dress, she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. "He's a monster. He killed his first wife, Sarah. Get out while you still can." The confirmation hit Helena like a physical blow. Sarah wasn't just a name in a diary. She was real, and she was dead. Before Helena could react, Caroline straightened up, a placid smile on her face, and walked away. Mrs. Marshall hadn't heard a thing. Helena's mind was reeling. He killed his wife. The words echoed in her head. She had to get to the sheriff. When Samuel returned, his face was grim. "Let's go," he said, taking the packages from her. "I need to speak with the sheriff," Helena said, trying to keep her voice steady. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "My business with him is finished, and so is yours." He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. He was strong, impossibly strong. He half dragged her to the buggy. As they rode out of town, Helena saw Sheriff Cooper watching them from his office window. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. She tried to convey the desperation, the terror she felt. But the sheriff just gave a slow, deliberate nod. Then he turned away. He wasn't going to help her. He was in on it. He was one of them. The entire town was a trap. The ride back to the ranch was a nightmare. The silence in the buggy was thick with unspoken threats. Helena clutched the locket around her neck, her mother's last gift. She felt utterly, hopelessly alone. Samuel hadn't just brought her to a ranch. He'd brought her to his own private kingdom, where he was the law, and the sheriff was his enforcer. When they reached the ranch, he didn't speak. He unloaded the supplies, his movements sharp and angry. Helena fled to her room, her sanctuary, her cell. She locked the door, her hands shaking. She had to get the diary. It was the only proof she had, the only thing that might save her. She waited until the house was quiet, until she heard Samuel leave for his nightly check of the barns. Then she crept from her room, down the darkened hallway to the master bedroom. It was the one place she hadn't been. His room. The door was unlocked. The room was Spartan, dominated by a large wooden bed. It smelled of leather and him, a cold, masculine scent. She moved to his dresser, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled open drawers, searching for anything, a letter, a clue. She found it in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of shirts. A small, tin box. It wasn't a diary. It was a stack of letters. And a marriage certificate. The certificate was for the marriage of Samuel Vaughn and Sarah Miller, dated 1 year ago. The letters were from Sarah to her sister. The early ones were full of hope, of love for her new husband and the life they were building. But the tone shifted. Sarah wrote of Samuel's growing paranoia, his obsession with the ranch, and the threat from Victor Blackwood. She wrote of his dark moods, his sudden rages. The last letter was unfinished. "He's not the man I married. The fight with Blackwood has changed him. He found my letters. He thinks I'm conspiring with him. He's locked me in. He says it's for my own safety, but I know the truth. He's going to." The letter ended there. Helena's hands were trembling so hard she almost dropped the papers. This was it, the proof. He had driven his wife mad with jealousy and then killed her. Suddenly, a floorboard creaked in the hallway. She froze. He was coming back. She shoved the letters back into the box, slid the drawer shut, and dove behind the heavy curtains of the window, just as the bedroom door swung open. Samuel walked into the room. He didn't turn on a lamp. He moved through the darkness with a familiar ease. He sat on the edge of the bed, his back to her, a heavy silhouette against the moonlight. He let out a long, shuddering sigh, a sound of profound grief. He wasn't a monster. He was a man in pain. Then he reached under his pillow. He pulled out a revolver, checked the cylinder with an expert flick of his wrist, and placed it on the bedside table. Then he lay down. Helena stood frozen behind the curtain, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. The grief, the gun, none of it made sense. Caroline had said he was a monster. The diary had confirmed it. But the sound he'd made. She had to know the truth. Not Caroline's version, not Sarah's terrified scribbles. The real truth. She waited an hour until his breathing was deep and even. Then she slipped from the room, the tin box clutched in her hand, and went back to her own cell. She had 1 day until the wedding. 1 day to figure out who Samuel Vaughn really was. A grieving husband or a cold-blooded killer. The next day, Saturday, was the day before her wedding. It passed in a blur of forced pleasantries and chilling preparations. Mrs. Hollins helped her alter one of her new dresses, adding lace to the collar. A proper bride, the housekeeper chirped. Helena felt like they were preparing a lamb for slaughter. She knew she couldn't trust the housekeeper, or the sheriff, or the beautiful, venomous Caroline. The only person who had shown her an ounce of pity was the old cowboy, Hank. She found him in the stables, mending a bridle. His hands, gnarled by years of work, were surprisingly gentle with the leather. "Mr. Hank," she began, her voice low, "can I ask you something?" He looked up, his eyes wary. "Depends on the question, miss." "Sarah," she whispered, "what happened to Samuel's first wife?" Hank's face closed down. He went back to his work. "Ain't my place to say." "Please," Helena pressed. "I'm supposed to marry him tomorrow. I have a right to know if I'm marrying a murderer." The old man flinched. He put down the bridle and looked at her, his eyes full of a deep, weary sadness. "He ain't no murderer, miss. He loved that woman more than this ranch, more than life itself." "Then what happened to her?" Hank sighed. He leaned against the stall. "It was Blackwood. Victor Blackwood. He's been trying to get this ranch for years, not just for the grazing. There's a spring up in the high pasture, controls the water for this whole valley. Blackwood wants it." He continued, his voice barely audible. "Blackwood started pressuring Samuel, stealing cattle, poisoning wells. Samuel got tight, worried. He and Sarah started fighting. He was trying to protect her, but she thought he was trying to control her. She was a city girl like you, didn't understand the dangers out here." One night, Hank's voice cracked. She decided to leave him, packed a bag, and rode out in the middle of a storm. Samuel was out looking for strays. By the time he found her, it was too late. Her horse had thrown her in the creek. The storm had turned it into a rage. He looked Helena straight in the eye. "He didn't kill her, miss. He blames himself for her death. Thinks he drove her to it. The man you see now, he's a ghost. What's left of him died in that creek with her." The story settled over Helena, a terrible, tragic weight. It fit. The grief she'd heard, the gun by the bed. He wasn't a monster. He was a broken man, haunted by a past he couldn't escape. And Caroline, the sheriff, why would they lie? Unless they were working for Blackwood. The thought hit her with the force of a physical blow. Of course, Caroline wanted Samuel, but if she couldn't have him, she'd help Blackwood destroy him. The sheriff was likely on Blackwood's payroll. It all made sense. They had been isolating her, turning her against Samuel, making her a weapon in their war against him. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the stable door. It was Samuel. His face was a mask of cold fury. "I told you," he hissed, his voice dangerously low, "not to talk to anyone." He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron, and pulled her from the barn. Hank made a move to intervene, but a look from Samuel stopped him dead. He dragged her back to the house, his rage a terrifying storm. He didn't stop at her room. He hauled her up the stairs and into his own bedroom, throwing her inside and slamming the door behind them. "What did he tell you?" he demanded, his blue eyes blazing. "The truth," Helena said, her fear giving way to a strange, defiant courage. "He told me about Sarah, about the accident." Samuel's face contorted in pain. "Her name is not to be spoken in this house." "Why are you doing this?" she cried. "This sham of a marriage? Why bring me here?" He stared at her for a long moment, the fury in his eyes warring with a deep, bottomless despair. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, dead. "Because I'm broke," he said. "Blackwood's war has ruined me. The bank is going to foreclose. My only chance was to secure a new loan. They required a stable family man, a wife." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The mail-order bride advertisement. You wrote it to find a business partner. He gave a short, bitter laugh. I didn't write it. I paid an agency. I needed a wife from the East. Someone respectable. Someone who wouldn't run at the first sign of trouble. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something other than anger or grief in his eyes. Respect. They sent me you. The confession hung in the air between them. This was not about love. It was not about companionship. It was a desperate, calculated business deal, and she was the collateral. So the wedding tomorrow is just for the bank? She asked. It is, he said. Once the loan is secure and Blackwood is dealt with, you'll be free to go. I'll give you enough money to start a new life. Anywhere you want. He turned away from her, walking to the window and staring out at the land he was about to lose. I'm sorry I frightened you. I've been unwell since Sarah's death. I see threats everywhere. I thought isolating you was the only way to keep you safe until this is over. The raw honesty in his voice disarmed her. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't a monster. He was just a man pushed to the brink, trying to hold on to the only thing he had left. The wedding day dawned bright and clear. Helena felt a strange calm as she dressed. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold resolve. She wasn't a victim anymore. She wasn't a pawn. She was a partner. Whether Samuel Vaughn knew it or not. The ceremony in the small church was a surreal affair. The townspeople watched, their faces unreadable. Caroline Richards sat in the front pew, her expression a mask of smug triumph. She thought she was watching the final act of Samuel's downfall. She had no idea the play had changed. When Reverend Parker pronounced them man and wife, Samuel's kiss was brief, chaste, the touch of a stranger. The celebration at the church hall was just as tense. Helena moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations that felt like condolences. She saw Sheriff Cooper in a corner, talking quietly with a man she recognized as one of Blackwood's top hands. The conspiracy was out in the open, for anyone willing to see it. She knew then what she had to do. This wasn't just Samuel's fight anymore, it was hers. When they returned to the ranch, the house felt different. It was their home now, legally, officially. Samuel showed her to the master bedroom. You can take the bed, he said, grabbing a blanket. I'll sleep on the floor. No, Helena said. The word was quiet but firm. It stopped him in his tracks. This is our room, Samuel. This is our home, and starting tonight, we defend it together. He turned to look at her, confusion warring with surprise on his face. I know about the sheriff, she said, her voice low and urgent. I know about Caroline. They're working for Blackwood. They tried to turn me against you. They thought I was your weakness. They were wrong. She walked toward him, closing the space between them. I am not the fragile city flower they think I am. And I am not leaving. This is my fight now, too. For the first time since she'd arrived, Samuel Vaughn looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw not a mail-order bride, not a business arrangement, but an ally, a fire-forged partner in the war for his survival. A slow smile spread across his face. It transformed him, chasing the ghosts from his eyes. They said you were too fierce to make a proper wife, he said, his voice full of a strange wonder. They were right, Helena replied, a smile touching her own lips. I'm not a proper wife. I'm the kind of wife you need. The next few weeks were a blur of strategy and preparation. The loan from the bank came through, giving them a stay of execution. But they knew Blackwood wouldn't give up. He would escalate. Helena and Samuel became a team. She took over the ranch's books, her sharp mind finding efficiencies he had overlooked. He taught her to shoot, his hands guiding hers on the weight of the revolver. The distance between them vanished, replaced by a deep, unspoken bond forged in the crucible of shared danger. They still slept in the same room, he on the floor, she in the bed, But the nights were filled with quiet conversation, sharing stories, making plans. He told her about building the ranch, about his dreams. She told him about Philadelphia, about her loneliness. They were no longer strangers. The attack came not at night, but in the bold light of day. Helena was in the garden when she heard the thunder of hooves, a dozen riders moving fast, Blackwood at their head. She ran for the house, shouting the alarm. Samuel and the men were in a far pasture. Only she, Mrs. Hollins, Silas, and young Tommy were at the main compound. But Mrs. Hollins wasn't the kindly housekeeper anymore. As Helena burst into the kitchen, she saw the woman at the back door, waving a signal to the approaching riders. The betrayal was swift and absolute. Mrs. Hollins was Blackwood's sister. She had been his spy all along. "I'm sorry, dear," the housekeeper said, a cruel smile on her face as two of Blackwood's men grabbed Helena. Samuel should have sold when he had the chance. They dragged her into the yard just as Blackwood reined in his horse. "Well, well," he said, his eyes glittering. "The happy couple. Where's your husband?" "He's not here," Helena spat, struggling against her captors. "He will be," Blackwood said. He nodded to Mrs. Hollins. The barn. The housekeeper walked calmly toward the massive barn, a torch in her hand. It held their prize breeding stock, their winter hay. Losing it would cripple them for good. "No!" Helena screamed. But just as Mrs. Hollins reached the barn door, a rifle shot cracked through the air. The torch flew from her hand. Samuel was there. He stood on the porch of the bunkhouse, his rifle steady, his face a mask of cold death. The ranch hands were with him, appearing from the stables in the forge, weapons raised. They had seen the dust from the pasture and had come at a full gallop. Blackwood laughed. "So the ghost decides to fight. A little late, Vaughn. I have your wife." He pulled a pistol, pressing the cold barrel to Helena's temple. "The deed to the spring," Blackwood snarled, "or your new bride dies just like the last one." The world went silent. Helena could feel Samuel's agony across the dusty yard. He was being forced to choose between the land he'd bled for and the woman he'd just found. "Let her go, Blackwood," Samuel said, his voice dangerously quiet. "The deed!" Blackwood screamed, his composure cracking. Slowly, Samuel lowered his rifle. He turned and walked into the main house. Helena's heart sank. He was giving up. He emerged a moment later, a piece of paper in his hand. The deed. He started walking toward them, his steps slow and measured. "That's it, Vaughn," Blackwood crooned, his eyes locked on the paper. "Bring it to me." But Helena saw it. The slight flick of Samuel's eyes toward the stable roof, the almost imperceptible nod. He wasn't surrendering. He was setting a trap. When Samuel was halfway across the yard, he stumbled, dropping the deed. As Blackwood's men instinctively looked down, Samuel dove for cover. All hell broke loose. Gunfire erupted from the bunkhouse, the stables, the main house roof. It was a perfectly executed ambush. Blackwood's men were caught in a brutal crossfire. In the chaos, Helena stomped down hard on the instep of the man holding her. He yelled in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all she needed. She broke free, sprinting for the house, as bullets whizzed past her. She scrambled inside, grabbing the revolver Samuel had taught her to use. She ran to the upstairs window, the one overlooking the yard. The battle raged below. Blackwood had taken cover behind the wagon, firing at Samuel. He was a good shot. He was pinning Samuel down. Helena raised the revolver, her hands steady, her breath even. She remembered Samuel's words. "Don't hesitate." She lined up the shot. She saw Blackwood raise his pistol, aiming for Samuel's exposed position. She fired. The gun kicked in her hand. Down in the yard, Blackwood's pistol flew from his grasp as the bullet slammed into it. He stared at his hand in disbelief. That moment's distraction was all Samuel needed. He burst from cover, closing the distance and slamming into Blackwood with the force of a freight train. The fight was brutal, primal. It ended with Samuel standing over a beaten and broken Victor Blackwood, just as Sheriff Cooper and a posse of deputies rode into the yard, their guns drawn. But they weren't there to help Blackwood. They were there to arrest him. Young Tommy, it turned out, had slipped away in the first moments of the attack, riding like the wind to a neighboring ranch where a territorial marshal happened to be staying. The law in Promise Creek might be corrupt, but the territory's wasn't. They arrested Blackwood, his sister, and the surviving members of his gang. The sheriff, seeing his benefactor fall, tried to feign ignorance, but the marshal wasn't buying it. His day of reckoning was coming. In the quiet aftermath, as the dust settled, Samuel walked across the yard to where Helena stood on the porch. His face was bruised, his shirt torn, but his eyes were clear for the first time. The ghosts were gone. He stopped in front of her, his gaze full of an emotion so powerful it took her breath away. "You saved my life," he said. "We saved each other," she replied. He reached out, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. "Helena," he said, his voice thick with a feeling he could no longer hide. "The contract is fulfilled. You are free to go." She looked at him, this broken, beautiful man who had fought his way back from the abyss. She looked at the ranch, their home, scarred but standing. She looked at the future, a vast, open prairie of possibility. "This is my home, Samuel," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere." He pulled her into his arms, and his kiss was not the chaste peck of a stranger or the desperate act of a business partner. It was the kiss of a man who had found his way home, a fire that didn't burn, but warmed him to his very soul. In the years that followed, the story became a legend in Promise Creek. The tale of the taciturn rancher and the fierce mail-order bride from the east who faced down a land baron and won. They rebuilt the ranch, stronger than before. They had children, a son with his father's quiet strength, and a daughter with her mother's unshakable fire. Samuel Vaughn never slept on the floor again, and Helena Foster, the woman who had lost everything, found that in the heart of the wild, untamed West, she had finally gained it all. If you enjoyed this story of grit and redemption, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next strange tale from the pages of history.